Somewhere in a small fishing village in Denmark, a man who earns barely enough to cover his bills rates his own life satisfaction higher than a millionaire living in a glass tower in a major city. This is not an isolated curiosity. It is a pattern that has shown up again and again in decades of research, and it points to something deeply uncomfortable for anyone who has ever believed that success, money, or achievement is the final destination on the road to happiness. What if everything you've been told about happiness is, at best, incomplete, and at worst, almost entirely backwards? To understand happiness, you first have to understand that the human brain was never actually designed to make you happy. It was designed to keep you alive long enough to reproduce, and those are two very different goals. Evolutionary psychologists point out that constant contentment would have been a survival disadvantage for our ancestors. A perfectly satisfied early human lounging without worry was far less likely to notice danger, search for food, or improve their shelter before winter arrived. Discontent, restlessness, and craving were not flaws in the system, they were the system, quietly pushing our ancestors to keep moving, keep striving, keep surviving. This single evolutionary fact explains something almost every person has felt but rarely understands: the strange emptiness that creeps in just days after achieving something you once believed would finally make you happy. This phenomenon has a name in psychology, and it might be one of the most important concepts you will ever learn about your own mind. It is called hedonic adaptation, sometimes referred to as the hedonic treadmill. The idea is simple, but its implications are staggering. No matter how much your circumstances improve, whether through a salary increase, a new relationship, or a long-awaited achievement, your baseline level of happiness tends to return to roughly where it was before, often within a matter of weeks. Researchers studying lottery winners found something that shocked the public when it was first published. After an initial period of euphoria, most lottery winners returned to approximately the same happiness levels they had before winning, sometimes even reporting lower satisfaction in certain areas of life as new pressures and complications emerged. Meanwhile, in dramatic contrast, many people who experience significant accidents or injuries report a similar pattern in reverse, with happiness levels gradually climbing back toward their original baseline as well. This raises a question that should genuinely unsettle you. If both extreme luck and extreme misfortune eventually fade into the same emotional starting point, how much control do external circumstances really have over your happiness at all? This is where the story takes an unexpected turn, because if circumstances alone cannot explain happiness, something else clearly must. For decades, one of the longest-running scientific studies ever conducted has tracked the same group of people across their entire adult lives, monitoring their health, relationships, careers, and emotional well-being decade after decade. The conclusion researchers eventually reached, after following these lives for over 80 years, was almost shockingly simple. It was not wealth, it was not fame, it was not even career achievement. The single strongest predictor of long-term happiness and even physical health in old age was the quality of a person's close relationships. People who felt genuinely connected to others, supported during hardship, and able to rely on close friends or family, consistently lived longer, healthier, and emotionally richer lives than those who pursued status or money while neglecting their personal connections. But why would relationships matter so much more than almost anything else? The answer lies deep within human biology, specifically within a hormone most people have heard of but rarely understand fully. Oxytocin, sometimes nicknamed the bonding hormone, is released during moments of genuine connection, a warm hug, a deep conversation, even simple eye contact held a little longer than usual. This hormone does more than create a pleasant feeling. It actively reduces levels of cortisol, the stress hormone responsible for that tight, anxious feeling so many people carry through their daily lives without realizing it. In essence, meaningful human connection is not just emotionally comforting, it is biologically protective, quietly working in the background to shield your body and mind from the corrosive effects of chronic stress. Yet, connection alone does not complete the picture. Psychologists studying happiness have identified another surprising ingredient, one that initially seems unrelated to joy altogether: a sense of purpose. Numerous studies have found that people who feel their daily actions are meaningful, even in small ways, report significantly higher life satisfaction than those who feel their daily routines lack any deeper significance, regardless of their income level. This explains why a teacher earning a modest salary can report greater life satisfaction than a wealthy executive who feels disconnected from any meaningful impact in their work. Purpose appears to function almost like a psychological anchor, holding a person steady even during difficult periods, because suffering paired with meaning feels fundamentally different from suffering that feels pointless and empty. This brings us to one of the most surprising discoveries in modern happiness research, something that completely contradicts popular self-help advice. Many people assume that happiness comes primarily from doing what feels good in the moment, but research strongly suggests that doing what feels meaningful matters far more for long-term emotional well-being. In one widely discussed psychological framework, researchers distinguish between hedonic well-being, the pursuit of pleasure and comfort, and eudaimonic well-being, the pursuit of meaning and personal growth. People who organize their lives primarily around pleasure often report higher happiness in the short term, but lower overall life satisfaction over time, while people who organize their lives around meaningful goals, even if those goals involve struggle or temporary discomfort, report deeper and more stable happiness across the years. This single distinction may explain why some people, despite living through hardship, describe their lives as deeply fulfilling, while others, despite living comfortably, describe an unshakable feeling that something essential is missing. Money, of course, cannot be ignored entirely in this conversation, and the relationship between income and happiness is more nuanced than either extreme position, that money buys happiness or money means nothing would suggest. Research has consistently found that money does meaningfully increase happiness up to the point where basic needs, financial security, and a reasonable buffer against unexpected hardship are met. Beyond that threshold, however, additional income produces dramatically diminishing emotional returns. This pattern makes evolutionary sense once you consider that financial stress activates many of the same brain regions involved in physical pain and threat detection. Removing that stress genuinely improves well-being, but once safety and stability are achieved, the brain's craving system simply moves on to chase new goals, new comparisons, and new sources of dissatisfaction, regardless of how much money sits in the bank. Gratitude, surprisingly, appears to interrupt this constant chasing in a way few other practices can. Neuroscientists studying gratitude have found that the simple act of consciously acknowledging things you appreciate activates regions of the brain associated with reward and emotional regulation, essentially retraining the mind's natural tendency to comparison and craving. In one widely cited study, participants who wrote short letters of gratitude reported improved mood, and remarkably, these effects were still measurable weeks after the exercise had ended. This suggests something profound about the nature of happiness itself. It may not be something we passively wait to receive from favorable circumstances, but something we can actively, deliberately cultivate, almost like strengthening a muscle that most people never knew they had. Perhaps the most surprising insight from decades of happiness research is this: happiness was never meant to be a permanent destination. It was always meant to be a fleeting, recurring visitor, appearing in brief moments of connection, accomplishment, or gratitude, then naturally fading so that motivation and growth could continue. The people who seem to suffer most are not those who experience too little happiness, but those who mistakenly believe happiness should be constant, chasing an emotional state that, by design, was never built to last forever. So perhaps the real question is not how to become permanently happy, but how to build a life rich enough in connection, purpose, and gratitude that even when happiness inevitably fades, as it always will, something deeper and more resilient remains, quietly holding you steady underneath.